Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's the CG guy, Johnny Z here. Thank you so much for tuning back into the channel. The Rolling Stones have released their deluxe reissue of Black and Blue. Today, I'm going to be sharing my thoughts on the new Steven Wilson mix. You also have the outtakes and jam sessions featuring Jeff Beck as well, and a live set. So, a lot to unpack here. Going to share my thoughts. Let's get started. Let's dive into the new Steven Wilson mix first. The dude is everywhere. Steven Wilson from Porcupine Tree. He's remixing everything these days. He's done work with the likes of Jethro Tull, Deep Purple, yes, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, King Crimson, and many more. Just to name a handful of the bands he's worked with and done remixes for. He has a very distinct way of remixing these albums, and it's polarizing to a lot of people. Definitely a challenge to accept a new mix of an album that you've been hearing the same way for years, and what I've learned to do with these Steven Wilson mixes is to separate the original from the new mix and enjoy both of them for what they are. I think for the most part, Wilson stays true to the original record at its core, but what I love about his work is how he's really able to bring out some of the more subtle nuances on the album and allow you to hear things that maybe previously didn't notice when listening on past mixes of whatever album he's working on. And there's a lot of that in this new Stones mix for me, for Black and Blue, a very underrated album by the band, and I think it's awesome that they pick a record that's full of deep cuts and really captures the Stones at a crossroads in their career now in the post Mick Taylor era, and they use Black and Blue as sort of an audition for Mick's replacement, with a number of different guitarists playing on the record, like Harvey Mandel, Wayne Perkins, and of course Ronnie Wood, who would eventually get the job. And that's another reason why I think it was a great choice, to choose a new mix for this album specifically, that highlights some of the subtleties from a diverse group of players on this album, not to mention, of course, guest appearances from the likes of Billy Preston, Nicky Hopkins, Ali E. Brown, and more. You can see the track listing right over here. Track number 1, Hot Stuff. Track 2, Hand of Fate. Track 3, Cherry O Baby. Track 4, Memory Motel. Track 5, Hey Negrita. Track 6, Melody. Track 7, Fool to Cry. And track 8, Crazy Mama to close things out. There are definitely elements of these songs that I had not heard before. Listening to it, you feel like you're right there in the studio with this new mix, hearing, the count-in on Melody, right? I love the way that Steven Wilson accentuated the keys on Fool to Cry as well. Mick's vocals feel more towards the forefront, I think, on this new mix, and everything gets a chance to breathe as well. One concern a lot of people had was over Hot Stuff. Around the 2-minute 50-second mark of Hot Stuff, it skips over a bit on the words Hot Stuff. That issue has been resolved, at least on streaming, which is a relief. But this new mix really brings the album alive in new ways, and this is not a remaster like the '09 remasters. This is an all-new mix of the album. It sounded fine to begin with, but I definitely think that Steven Wilson made it more immersive and really found a way to make everything feel clearer and more vibrant. And I only have this record on vinyl, so I may have to pick up the CD version of this to add to the collection just for the new mix alone. But that's not all the deluxe reissue has to offer. There's also a live show from Earl's Court from 1976 on discs 3 and 4. But what I was most interested in, maybe a little bit more than the Steven Wilson mix, in fact, was disc 2 on here, which is 6 tracks of unreleased outtakes and jams. And like I had mentioned before, you had a lot of musicians coming in and out of the studio during the making of this record, including Jeff Beck. And this new deluxe reissue finally includes some of the Jeff Beck jam sessions, and you can see the disc 2 track listing over here, right? I Love Ladies, Shame, 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 Chuck Berry Style Jam with Harvey Mandel, Blues Jam with Jeff Beck, Rotterdam Jam with Jeff Beck and Robert A. Johnson, and Freeway Jam with Jeff Beck. And it's beyond cool to get to hear these sessions and, hear Jeff jamming with the band, all absolute legends playing together. What's not to love about that? And I'm thrilled the Stones have finally decided to release this from their vault after all these years. And of course, if you know the story behind it, Jeff Beck wasn't exactly looking for, a gig in the Stones at this point, but, for him it was more of a casual thing, right, as the band searched for Mick Taylor's replacement. But it's kind of cool to listen to the 3 tracks that they released and with Jeff Beck on them, and just to hear a possible alternate timeline where he did join the band and what that could have sounded like, so that's really cool. And on top of that, you have Shame, 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 which was released as the lead single for this box set. Not to be confused, of course, with Shame, Shame, Shame from the Tattoo You reissue. That was a Jimmy Reed cover. This is a Shirley and Company cover, and Mick Jagger has one of the best falsettos in rock and sounds great on this track. Charlie Watts delves into a little bit of disco behind the kit, which is very cool. Really neat cover, in my opinion, and again, so great they dug this stuff out of the archives for us to have all these years later. And that's what box sets really should be all about, offering the fans something new and different or rare. And, because it's become such an oversaturated market where everyone's releasing these expensive anniversary sets, you really have to be selective which box sets you buy these days and, which are actually worth the money or not. Not based on added collector's items like, replica programs and guitar picks and ticket stubs and stuff like that, but by the actual music the bands are releasing instead. I think the Stones did a fantastic job here of doing that. So for me, this is a box set that I'm absolutely going to have to pick up. I have it on vinyl, but definitely going to need the CD version here to add to the collection, for those Jeff Beck sessions for the new Steven Wilson mix. I think is a massive improvement on an album that sounded fine to begin with, but, some really great work here by the Stones. Of course, you have that live set from Earl's Court as well. Stones live in '76, some great stuff there. So for me, this is a must-have, and I could not recommend it enough. So that wraps up this review here of the new Steven Wilson mix of Black and Blue. And, I say this all the time on the channel when I do these types of reviews. I am not an audiophile. You guys tend to have a much better ear for these things than I do. So please let me know in the comment section below if there's something I missed or neglected to point out about this new mix compared to the old one. How do you think it fares compared to the original or the '09 remaster? I want to hear from you because you guys hear things much better than I do when it comes to this kind of stuff. Also, wanted to share my thoughts on the new Jeff Beck sessions that were released here. That is really cool for me, so wanted to talk about that as well. And if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel down below, turn on the bell for notifications so you don't miss a new upload. Follow me on Instagram at the CD Guy JZ, all lowercase, one word. And until next time, it's the CD Guy Johnny Z signing off. Take care, everybody.